German submarine development in the aftermath of World War I looked like it was either going to stall out completely or be very badly hampered by a pesky clause in the Versailles Treaty that forbade Germany from owning, operating, or as per Article 191, even building submarines. However, once the dust had settled, a newly minted Kriegsmarine and a number of German shipwrights and designers came up with a cunning plan. They moved to the nearby Netherlands and then set up a company through which they could continue to design such vessels because now they technically weren't in Germany. Armed with the latest World War I German U-boat blueprints, they set about designing submarines for the international market, building such vessels for Turkey, Spain, the Soviet Union, and Finland, although not all sales would be completed with delivery to the initiating country. As with dreadnoughts in the pre-World War I period, there was a little bit of internal sales going on even after the keels had been laid. Thus, when the Anglo-German naval agreement officially opened up a path for the now Kriegsmarine to own U-boats again, fresh designs could be drawn up that weren't relying on something that was 15 to 20 years old. From the lineage of small coastal submarines came the Type II, and from a short lineage of the aforementioned commercial contracts, which were themselves based on the UB3 type from World War I, came designs for the Type I, and today's subject, the Type VII. If you look at the UB3 and the Type VII side by side, you can see that not a huge amount had actually changed in terms of overall profile. In case you're wondering, the Type III through to the Type VI were all either experimental or paper designs. The Type Is, however, would prove something of a disappointment with only 2 ever built. But the first Type VII, the U-27, had been ordered before the first Type I, the U-25, had even been laid down. So it wasn't quite a case of one superseding the other, but rather one design just being far more successful in the first place. Production would begin with the Type VIIA, the first of 5 combat variants plus 1 logistics type. The 7A displaced about 625 tons on the surface and another 120 tons on top of that submerged, with a pair of diesels that totalled around 2,200 brake horsepower for surface running at a speed of 16 knots, plus electric motors and batteries for the 2 screws that totalled 750 brake horsepower, which gave an underwater speed of about 8 knots. Armament consisted of an 88mm deck gun with an option to install a 20mm flat cannon, as well as a total of 5 torpedo tubes in the hull, 4 found in the bow and 1 in the stern, with 1 full set of reloads for the bow tubes and then 2 more for good measure, for a total of 11, as the stern tube was external and could not be reloaded at sea. The torpedoes could be landed in favour of mines if you desired. However, there was an immediate desire for improvements, and the Type 7B was soon ordered. Adding just over 125 tons to surface displacement, this version had more powerful diesels rated at around 3,000 brake horsepower, carried more fuel for greater range, a slightly greater surface top speed thanks to the diesels, and the aft torpedo tube was moved internally. Total torpedo count went up to 14, reflecting that it was now possible and relevant to carry some reloads for the aft tube. This would be the model in production when World War II broke out. But it would be almost immediately superseded by the most widely built variant, the Type 7C, whose production started shortly after the outbreak of the war. The C added only about 15 tons, mostly in the form of better sonar and a marginally stronger hull, which raised, or you could technically argue lowered, operating and crush depths somewhat. Of the just over 700 Type 7 submarines built, over 550 of them would be Type 7Cs. The increasing effectiveness of Allied anti-submarine warfare efforts, coupled with the most experienced German captains finding survival often lay in going as deep as humanly possible to a point below the maximum reach of current Allied depth charges, led to the development of the Type 7C-41, which used lighter internals to drop 10 tons off the total displacement, and this was used to pay for a thicker pressure hull, which allowed for dramatically increased operating and crush depths, with the latter now officially exceeding 1,000 feet. This was to be dialed up to 11 with the Type 7C-42, which was only fractionally larger but would displace almost 250 tons more, largely on account of having an even thicker pressure hull that pushed operating depth below the 7A and 7B's crush depths. In theory, the 7C-42 had its own crush depth somewhere below 1,300 feet, which in theory would allow it to go to ground, quite literally, anywhere on any continental shelf in its area of operations quite comfortably. However, contracts for Type VII production were drying up as it was supposed to be replaced with the Type 23, and none of the 7C-42s were ever launched. That leaves the Type 7D, a much larger mine-laying type whose underwater qualities were actually somewhat worse than the 7A, thanks to a much expanded pressure hull, and the Type 7F, the largest of all Type 7s, which topped the scales at just under 1,090 tons on the surface and around 1,180 tons submerged. Offensively, the Type 7F was identically armed to all other variants, minus a deck gun, but they could also carry 25 additional torpedoes which could be supplied to other U-boats, essentially acting as mobile ammo packs. 6 of the mine layers and 4 of the supply types would end up being built. 156 Type 7s of all variants survived the war, or were scuttled at the very end of it, representing an almost 78% loss rate for the type during the war. After post-war testing operations by various navies, a lone vessel, U-995 of the Type 7C-41 variant, remains, which is currently preserved near Kiel in Germany.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.